Okay, wait, what is this?
Yeah, we are reconnected. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, yes, we had an interruption with the power, but with the internet, but now it's okay. Okay, let me admit all of you. Technology does not always work, eh? Okay. So we have stopped at before break by introducing this idea of the ideal of poverty, and we have already said that the ideal of poverty had been and is still a common one of the religious communities. Typically, the idea is that an individual member of the order owns no property at all, and this is not specific to the friars, but religious life. Now, if a member buys a car, as we have said, for instance, it is not strictly his car or her car, even though he may have exclusive use of it, and it was not bought with his money, so he doesn't have any money of his own. Rather, it belongs to the order. Now, the original Franciscan ideal, went further, and what was it? Not only did the individual friar who is writing this who has written these two lines, these cross lines? Hello, is somebody trying to write on the slides? And so we are saying the original Franciscan ideal then went further. Not only who has written by mistake? Can the one who has done it rub it, eh? Because then it's disturbing this presentation. Kindly don't write things. Sure, he's touching those functions that I have put there. But your job is to listen to the presentation, not to play around with those annotate, we call them. Let me first of all erase. Okay, so the original Franciscan ideal then went further, and not only did the individual friar have no property of his own, neither did the order itself. Now, and this is where we are going to see this discrepancy between the understanding of the apostolic poverty on the part of the Franciscans and Pope John the 22nd. So the Franciscans, therefore, were really supposed to be mendicants, to live by begging. And the friars were moving from place to place, and they lived by begging if for what they needed, if they thought they would not produce it themselves. So anything donated to the order, such as a house, for example, or a piece of land, strictly speaking, remained the property of the original owner. So if you donated, for example, land, or if you donated a house to the order, it belonged, or it, strictly speaking, remained the property of the original owner or the donor, who merely granted the use of it to the Franciscans. And here you can see the difference between using and owning. Or if that would not work, as for example, in the case of bequest or in a will, after the original owner had died, then the ownership would go to the papacy or to the Holy See, to the Pope. So let us say somebody wrote in his will that he or she would wish that after he or she has died, that this property, may it be land, may it be house, etc., that it be given to the Franciscans. Now, it still belonged to the one who has donated it in as far as he or she was alive. But when he died or she died, then the property or the owner of the piece of land or the house will not actually belong to the friars, but the actual owner would be the Holy See or the papacy. But even if the owner or the ownership would belong to the papacy or the Pope could not touch that which was given to us. So we had an exclusive use of it, but not owning it. So this is the issue at hand, and you see what the Pope will say about it. So both the spirituals, that is us, and the conventuals, thought this ideal of uncompromising poverty was exhibited by the life of Jesus and the apostles, who, they said, had given up all property, both individually and collectively. So St. Francis regarded these as a clear implication of several scriptural passages. For example, Matthew 6:24 to 34, and then 8, verse 20, and chapter 19:21. So in short, the apostolic, and that is also the Franciscan ideal, was live without a safety net. Live without a safety net. And when you look at the rule that the first order professes, that is the rule of 1223, you can see that in the writings of Francis and Clare. The rule of Francis of 1223, the so-called the regula bollata, or the rule with the papal seal, we do not, the vows that are mentioned there in chapter 1, that the way of life, the way and life of the Friars Minor is this: to live the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ in obedience, obedience comes first, without anything of our own. That's what we profess, not poverty, without anything of our own, and in chastity. So that without anything of our own, or the sine proprio, is actually developed, is actually born of what we are discussing here. That the Franciscans had the right of use, but not that of ownership. Of course, if everyone lived according to this ideal, so that no one owned any property, either individually or collectively, then there would be no property at all. So the Franciscan ideal then, shared by conventuals and spirituals alike, entailed a total abolition of all property rights. So not everyone shared this view. So outside the Franciscan order, most theoreticians agreed that Jesus and the apostles lived without individual property, but thought they did share property collectively. Like we know, the first Christians would sell that which they owned, and they would share it in common. You know, they would share it in common. They would live together and they would share it in common. So this was the ideal. Now, nevertheless, Pope Nicholas III in 1279 had officially approved the Franciscan view, not just as a view about how to organize the Franciscan order, but about the interpretation of the scriptural passages concerning Jesus and the apostles. His approval did not mean he was endorsing the Franciscan reading as the correct interpretation of scripture, but only that it was a permissible one, that there was nothing doctrinally suspect about the Jesus Jesus and his apostles' way of life, which actually had been copied or it's being imitated by the Franciscan, by the friars. Nevertheless, this interpretation was a clear reproach to the papacy, which at Avignon was wallowing in wealth to a degree it had never seen before. Remember, when I was presenting the milieu of Francis, I have shown you the competition that was there between the German Empire and the papacy. And because the papacy had become increasingly rich, it had failed in her service to the poor, and of course, the humility that is presented or that we see in Jesus Christ, he who was God and became a human person. So the Pope then, that is John the 22nd, would not accept this notion that Jesus and apostles lived in absolute poverty and the Franciscans are living the same, because then there was a lot of wealth, and he, as the Pope then, would see this interpretation or understanding as a slap on the face of the kind of life he and those around him were living at this particular time. So the clear implication of the Franciscan view, therefore, was that the Avignon popes were conspicuously not living their lives as an imitation of Christ, because they had amassed a lot of wealth for themselves, and therefore it was a betrayal in itself of the way Christ lived with his apostles. So whether for this reason or another, the Avignon Pope John the 22nd decided to reopen discussion on the question of apostolic poverty and to come to some resolution of the matter. And now when he decides to reopen this discussion and to be able to come with a resolution of this matter, then William of Ockham will be involved in the argumentation here. And this is his main contribution. And we're going to see how the William of Ockham dealt with it. Now, when discussions began at Avignon, conflicting opinions were freely put forward. Meanwhile, Michael of Cesena, and remember Michael of Cesena was the Minister General who commissioned William of Ockham to do his research, acting with insolent audacity, did not await the Holy See's decision. And therefore, on the 30th of May, 1322, the Chapter General of the Franciscan Order at Perugia is 20 kilometers from Assisi, declared itself convinced of the absolute poverty of Christ and the apostles. So the chapter, and you remember the chapter, when you're talking of the chapter for the Franciscan, for the friars, the first order, we are talking of this general meeting between the Minister General and the provincials and custos, those who are in charge of brothers in different parts of the world as their leaders. So it was this act that provoked John the 22nd to issue his first contribution to the dispute. His bull and conditorem, this is the papal bull is the, that came out in 1322. There, he put the whole matter in a legal framework. He's going to introduce a legal language into looking at this matter at hand. And let's see the argumentation, the legal issues. According to the Roman law, as formulated in the Code of Justinian, ownership and legitimate use cannot be permanently separated. And it is important to look at these two concepts, the concept of ownership and the concept of legitimate use. So according to the Roman law then, as formulated in the Code of Justinian, ownership and legitimate use cannot be permanently separated. For example, it is one thing for me to own a book, but to let you use it for a while. Now, if I own a book, or I own a pen, or I own predicate what, and allow you to use it for some time, now, when I allow you to use it for some time, who is the actual owner of that which you are using? Let's look at the argumentation here. Ownership, in that case, means that I can recall the book because I have lent you the book. And even if I do not do so, you should return it to me because I have lent it to you when you are done with it, right? But It is quite another matter for me to own the book, I'm the owner of the book, but to grant you permanent use of it. So if I give you a book and I grant you permanent use of it, or I lend you a book and I grant you permanent use of it, to agree not to record it, that I will not ask you to give it back to me as long as you want to keep it, and to agree that you have no obligation to give it back ever. I give you a pen, or I give you whatever I give you. I grant you permanent use of it. You don't have to give it back to me. Now, in the question like this, then, if I ask you who is the actual owner of the book, is the question here that we are dealing with. I give you this particular thing that I have given you. May it be a book, may it be a pen, may it be whatever, name it. And I grant you permanent use of it. I'm not going to recall it, or I'm not asking you to give it back. You have no obligation to give it back for forever. The question is then, who is the owner of the book? So Pope John the 22nd points out that from the point of view of Roman law, the latter case makes no sense. There is no practical difference in that case between you are having the use of the book and you are owning it. For in all intents and purposes, it is yours. I've given it to you. I have told you that you can have a permanent use of it. I'm not going to recall it I'm not going to recall it or to ask you to give it back. So in that case, who actually owns the book? This is what John the 22nd is asking. So let's see the argument here, the argumentations. Notice the criticism here. It is a legal argument against the claim that the papacy was an institution, as an institution, can own something. And yet the Franciscans as an order collectively have a permanent right to use it. As I have said, he, for example, gave a will, and in his will or her will says that when he or she dies, he or she has donated this land to the Franciscans. Now, in as far as the donor is alive, the actual owner, strictly speaking, is the one who has donated the land to the Franciscans. This was the understanding. Now, when this particular donor dies, then the actual owner of what was donated is the Holy See or the papacy. But the papacy or the Pope cannot actually touch that which is given to us, even if it belongs to him. And then the Pope John the 22nd said it doesn't make sense. So the complaint is not against the notion that an individual friar might have a right to use something until he dies, at which time use reverts to the owner, that is, all as the Franciscan would have it to the papacy. This would still allow some distinction between ownership and mere use. Rather, the complaint is against the notion that the order would not own anything outright, but would nevertheless have permanent use of it that goes beyond the life and death of any individual friar, so that the ownership remained permanently with the papacy, even though the Pope could not reclaim it, use it, or do anything at all with it. So John the 22nd argues that this simply abolishes the distinction between use and ownership. And as we are going to see this discussion as we further it on, John the 22nd will argue it, or will look at it in this way. He will say, if you use, own. That which you use, own, because there is no difference between use and ownership for him. But the friars, through William of Ockham, are arguing that they have an exclusive right for using whatever is given to them, but not owning it. The actual owner is the papacy or the Holy See. Let's look at the property rights here then, according to how William of Ockham will argue out. So special problem arise if the property involved in such that the use of it involves consuming, for example, food. In that case, it appears that there is no real difference between ownership and even temporary use. For things like food, using them amounts for practical purposes to owning them. They cannot be recalled after they are used. So Pope John the 22nd argues that even Jesus Christ then with his apostles, we're looking at it from this point of view, whatever they ate in their different missions, in their different missionary journeys, or in their different experiences, that which they ate was actually assimilated into the body, and therefore it could not be recalled back. And therefore, he says there is no way one can live in absolute poverty at all. So in short, John the 22nd, it follows that it is impossible fully to live the life of absolute poverty, even for the individual person, much less for a permanent institution like the Franciscan order. That's his argument. Now, the institution of property and property rights, therefore, began in the Garden of Eden. John the 22nd will say, the first time Adam and Eve ate something. Now, these property rights are not natural rights. On the contrary, they are established by a kind of a positive law by God, who gave everything in the garden to Adam and Eve. Remember, Pope John the 22nd has introduced this legal framework or legal argumentation so as to show that there is no way a person can live in absolute poverty, and therefore the life of Jesus and the apostles was not that of absolute poverty, and also the Franciscans are not living in absolute poverty. Now, in relation to the property rights, Ochkam disagreed. Ochkam disagreed with Pope John the 22nd. For him, there was no property in the Garden of Eden. So William of Ockham says, in the Garden of Eden, there was no property as such. Instead, Adam and Eve there had a natural right to use anything at hand. This natural right did not amount to a property right. However, since it could not have been used as the basis of a kind of legal claim. So, you know, William of Ockham rubbishes what John the 22nd stands for. He says, in the Garden of Eden, there was no property. There were just, it's like, for example, when you think of animals in a national park, like in Nairobi National Park here, the animals in the national park, to balance the ecosystem, we have the herbivorous that eat grass like buffaloes and giraffes, etc. But also you have carnivorous, you have leopards, you have lions that would actually make sure there is a balance in the ecosystem. Otherwise, if you had only herbivorous, buffaloes and giraffes, etc., they would eat all the grass. You need these predators so that there will be this balance. And therefore, what they use or what they eat in this national park, it is not a property